the following story with a friend of mine. Friend's name is Michael. Back to the story. One day Michael calls and says, "Jacob, my pump in my car is broken. I need to replace it. I need help." We ended up agreeing to go to my garage on Saturday, because his car is big and my garage is just relatively spacious. We wanted to go on Sunday, but I had things to do, and on Saturday Michael worked until 16 o'clock. We had to go after work, so we arrived at the garage at about 18:30. The problem was that in my garage cooperative they cut off the power at 22, and changing the pump in his car was inconvenient because of the bad design, and we already knew that we would be in the garage for a long time. And it's winter outside, not hot in general. So we took warm things: a gas stove, a cylinder for it, a kettle, so as not to freeze in case of power outage, and an electric heat gun to heat the garage. The cooperative is large. My garage is almost at the very end of it. That is, you pull out onto the main garage road, and there are rows of garages to your left and right. I haven't driven in there in a long time, so I had to clear a lot of snow to open the gate. We finally got the car into the garage and we could get to work. It was warm and hot. We were happy. We talked and stood. He asked to borrow a tool, for a good man is not sorry. He thanked and went on to dig. In the course of our work to change the pump, our mutual friend Alexander stopped by. He's a cab driver. He decided to visit us. We drank tea, talked, wished us luck, and went on about his business. The time is about 22 hours, and there is still a lot of work. We understand that we will have to freeze. When we had almost put the engine together, we noticed that it was the first hour in the morning, but the light had not been turned off. It was about 15 degrees below zero outside the gate, and ours was already warm, and there was not much work left. We had to fasten the suspension. Without a second jack it was difficult, but we were still satisfied. At 1 hour and 16 minutes in the morning I decided to run outside to go to the bathroom. It was dark, but the moon lit the space well, and I could basically see everything. When I finished, I took a drag on my e-cigarette and exhaled, glancing to the end of the row of garages, where there was my neighbor, whom I had lent a tool that I had already forgotten about. When the vapor from the cigarette cleared, I saw a strange scene. I felt a chill in my chest as I couldn't understand what was going on. My brain couldn't make sense of it. This tension was building, not immediately, but slowly. I saw an incomprehensible figure near the gate of my neighbor's garage. The light in the garage was on, and I could see him better through the ajar gate. This human-like figure was in a strange pose. His legs were at shoulder width, his hands were also spread apart, and in his right hand there was a round object, looking like a ball from a distance, and the figure was standing with its back to me. While I was trying to figure out what was going on, the creature turned its head 180 degrees in my direction without unfolding its torso. The distance was about 120 meters, but I realized it was looking into my eyes, and I noticed a sprawling smile on the creature's face. I panicked, stunned, and watched as the figure, with its back to me and its head turned in my direction, moved its legs backwards slowly toward me, picking up speed little by little. My movements were jerky, unnatural, and I just stood there, unable to move. Michael's voice distracted me from my thoughts. "What are you doing? Are you shitting yourself?" he shouted. When I came to, I ran to the garage, frantically trying to remember where the garage keys were. My first thought was to lock myself in the garage. There is no lock on my garage door to lock it from the inside. The only option is to open the gate sash, then close the wicket from the outside, and once inside the garage, close the gate sash. All this takes time, and I can't even remember where the garage keys are. While I was trying to find them, Michael, not understanding what was happening to me, went outside to look, and with a pale face ran back in. I found the keys and, taking them, ran outside to close the garage door, trying not to look in the direction of the approaching creature. After closing the gate, not without difficulty, the lock was frozen. I ran into the garage through the open gate leaves, still looking in the direction of the figure. She was already 3 garages away from ours. We flew into the garage and quickly closed the gate, which wasn't easy either, there was ice underneath it. We ran to the end of the garage from the gate behind the car and tried to catch our breath and make sense of the situation. After sitting like that for about 20 minutes, we didn't hear any sounds, so we decided to walk over to the gate. We didn't want to open them, so we looked through the vents to the left and right of the gate. When I peeked and I saw the garage across the street, it was quiet, nothing strange. I was about to step back and open the garage to get a better look when suddenly a face appeared in front of me. It didn't even fit in my field of vision. All I saw was part of a bloody crooked smile, and the stench that came from it was like the smell of rotting flesh. I collapsed in surprise and horror. At the same time, Michael looked through the vent on the other side, jumped back in fright. He saw my neighbor's head bobbing there, pale, staring into nothing. We crawled behind the car to the end of the garage. I grabbed a crowbar, my friend a hammer. We frankly doubted the help of these weapons. We just stepped away from the gate and stared at it, having no idea what to do. We decided to try calling someone, but neither Michael nor I had a network. I had managed to make video calls from the garage before without any problems, but this was it. Suddenly the gate started shaking, being yanked with tremendous force and frequency. It was comforting to think that the gate was made of metal of normal thickness, and the shocks were useless. Then came the powerful shocks. Snow and ice sprinkled from the gate. Suddenly, the light in the garage and consequently, the heat gun went out. This happened after the characteristic sound of cutting the power cable. The power cable to my garage goes through a vent. We heard the sound of something falling softly. Shining a flashlight into the area of the vent, we saw a piece of power wire lying around. We were very quiet. We started putting on everything we saw in the garage. We tried to heat up some tea on the gas stove, but the tank was empty and we didn't think to bring a spare. I also noticed a very strange detail that the time on my phone and my friend's phone had stopped at 1 hour and 16 minutes. After all I had been through, it seemed to me that it should soon be morning. But it was still night, judging from the vents. Not wanting to go up to the gate, I remembered that there was also a lower vent that ran under the garage, and if you went down into the cellar you could hear what was going on behind the gate. We went down into the cellar. After a minute or two, I heard the voice of Michael's wife, with his 2 children. Her name was Lisa. She was saying, "Michael, open up, let us in, we're cold, we're freezing." The voice definitely belonged to her, but she couldn't be here. Her daughter Eva was 2 years old. Her son was not yet a year old. The daughter was screaming, "Daddy, open us cold, let Daddy in, let Daddy in, let Daddy in, let Daddy in." My heart seemed to beat harder with each repetition of her voice. But then her voice got rougher and rougher, louder and louder. And finally there was a heartbreaking scream, "I'm going to get you anyway, come out of the basement, open the gate." When I came to, I turned my attention to Michael. There was a look of horror and confusion on his face. I whispered to him, "Did you hear that too?" He told me he had heard different things. He often buys cheaper potatoes in the fall and stores them in the basement of his garage, the garage being in another part of town. And when his grandmother runs out of potatoes, she calls him and asks him to bring more from the garage. So he hears his grandmother's voice, and this is what she tells him: "Michael, come out of the cellar. I know you're in there. Let Grandma in. I'm out of potatoes. Let me in. I'm hungry anyway." We crawled out of the cellar, sitting in shock, thinking, it is not yet dawn outside, the phone has 1 hour and 16 minutes. We plan further actions, so the engine is completely assembled. We need to put the part without a jack and get out of here. From the cold we can hardly move our fingers, and it will be even worse. By our joint efforts we managed to fix the part and tighten it. After that we heard a terrible sound, a very loud scraping of metal against metal behind the gate. The creature was trying to get in at any cost. We decided the following actions. We wait for about an hour. After the last sounds behind the gate, start the car. I open the mechanism for locking the gate leaves. and quickly go to the ram, or we will freeze simply. So we did. About an hour passed, silence, turned the key in the ignition, no reaction, failed battery. The garage, as if at one time became an impregnable fortress, and at another trap for us, did not want to let out. It occurred to us to start the car by pushing, but the size of the garage did not allow it. We jacked up one wheel, wrapped a tow rope around it, put it in gear, and started pulling to start the wheel. Since it was cold and the oil in the gearbox and engine had thickened, we could not start the engine on the first try, only the fifth. By then our fingers were no longer obeying, but we made it. Hope awoke in our heads. Could we really get out of this damn co-op? We heard the crunch of snow over our heads, someone walking on the roof. Horror gripped us again. And the creature took a second step, silently, then a second step again, silently again, as if listening. Then it was as if it was trying to poke through the slate and the concrete slab, trying to get into the garage in any way it could. We decided not to wait long, and when we heard the crunch of snow overhead in the distance, Michael got behind the wheel and I ran to the lever that locked the gate. As I unlocked it, I heard footsteps stomping toward the gate, and without wasting time, I jumped into the car. Michael released the clutch, accelerated, the wheels rumbled, and we flew through the gate. Because there was ice underneath, the gate didn't open all the way. Turning back, we drove through the gate again, and yay, we were outside. It was still dark outside, with the moon shining, just like when I first met the creature after going out to pee. As we drove out of the garage, I looked back. The creature had jumped off. It was also standing with its back to me, head in my direction. My neighbor's head was gone. It must have eaten it. The creature rolled over on its stomach and ran after us on all fours. My companion and I pulled onto the main road and picked up speed in the neighborhood of 100 miles an hour. I was still looking back. The figure couldn't catch up with the car. It moved farther and farther away until it became a dot. We started to warm up, the heater was warming, and I fell asleep. I opened my eyes in the hospital. My relatives told me what really happened, and I remembered everything. At 22 o'clock the lights went out. A neighbor came into the garage, returned my tools, said he would not freeze here, that he was going home, and advised us. We said goodbye and he left. We wanted to finish the job, there was not much left. We assembled the engine, but couldn't attach the suspension arm. By 1 o'clock in the morning we were getting pretty cold. I had a long hose that we decided to take outside, by attaching a clamp to the engine, start the engine without opening the gate, and get warm. So we did. It was nice and warm. We felt sleepy, frozen, tired, and fell asleep. As it turned out later, the hose we attached to the engine on the clamp cracked from the frost, and the smoke filled the garage. We got carbon monoxide poisoning and passed out. The wives couldn't get through, realized something was wrong, and called the rescuers. They cut the gate off its hinges and got us out. When they arrived, the engine was shut off, the timing belt was torn. Apparently that was one of the factors that kept us alive. We had been in a coma for about 2 weeks, and everything that happened in this story after 22 hours was my brain activity while I was in a coma. I talked to Michael when we were discharged, told him about what I saw. He didn't dream anything, except that he remembered one detail. Before he fell asleep then in the car, his eyes fell on the clock on the dashboard. The time was 1 hour and 16 minutes.